And now for our final speaker, but definitely not least, which is Claire Stocks. She's the co-founder of Walk Ride GM, the region's walking and cycling campaign. She's also the co-founder of Chorlton Bike Deliveries, a sustainable cooperative delivering local shopping and surplus food, and also now items for the NHS. She's worked for the BBC for a long time as a journalist and an editor. She also worked on the London 2012 Olympics, and she's really excited to tell us tonight about two women that have inspired her. So welcome to the stage, Claire. You want to take...
Brilliant. Right. So I'm last tonight, and I hope I'm not going to keep you too long from your beds or wherever it is you're going to. But thank you for staying till the end. Now, I want you to join me on an Edwardian road trip. And we're going to step back in time, 125 years, to a window in time before cars took off. Can you put that in the presentation mode? There we go. Right, meet our two heroes. This is Margaret McCain and her younger sister Kathleen, and they were born in 1885 and 1886. And here are their parents. I'll tell you what, you just do it. Here are their parents, John McCain and May McCain. John was born in Hexham to a draper, and he left Hexham when he was 15 to make his fortune first in Newcastle and then in London. And he worked in shops in Oxford Street before he managed to set up his own business. And he was in his 40s when he met May McCain, and they married in 1893. And she was quite a lot younger than him, 25 years age difference. So, next slide. Mr. McCain worked in London. This was his flat here in Kensington, up in that building on the left there. And he, by this time, was running a business importing pianos, from Germany. And so he was a self-made man, and he'd done enough by then to have a family home out in Henley, where he commuted by train up into London every day. And the family were well enough off in order to be able to hire a governess to look after those two young children, Kathleen and Margaret. Now, how do I know all this? Next slide. How do I know all this about this family? This is my family. And John and May, they are my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother. And Kathleen and Margaret, the older sister, was my granny. So I'm going to tell you a bit about them tonight. So a reminder where we are in history. This is Queen Victoria. She was on the throne when Margaret, my granny, was born in 1895, and she didn't die until 1901. And those are the three future kings around her there. So all of the things you see on the right, none of those weren't really in use in your home. There was no telephones, no washing machines, no electric lights. Cars were a toy for rich people, and you didn't fly anywhere. You got a boat or a train. So next slide. This is Hexham. This is where my great-grandfather was born. This is what it would have looked like back in the 1900s, because we were basically in the transport world was a horse-drawn world. So in rural towns like Hexham, but basically horses was how you got around short distances. And next slide. But this is what the City of London looked like. So in cities, obviously, transport the streets were busy, just in case you thought this was sort of a quiet time of history. And largely we were in this horse-drawn world. So in the City of London, there were about 3.5 million horses at work in the whole of Britain at that time, and a million of them were employed pulling transport. If you click on, next one. And a lot of them were employed doing this, pulling the trolley, the omnibus. So this was the early form of public transport, a bus pulled by horses. So the speed limit in this day and age was still 8 miles an hour, because that was as fast as horses could go. But around 1900, it was increased to 14 miles an hour. And other than that, there weren't really any limits on what you could do on the roads. The electric tram had just come in. 1901 was the first electric tram in Britain. But we were still in the golden age of rail. And the rail industry employed 500,000 people in the country. It was big business. There was only about 32 million people in Britain at that time. So 1900 to 1910 was this transport window where kind of we could have gone any way. All things were to play for. There was rail, there was trams, there was horse-drawn buses, there was going to be the motor car and the motor buses. So it was this window of opportunity. Next slide. So I'm just going to play you a little clip here of what the streets of London looked like in 1905 at the start of that decade. And there's no sound on here, so it doesn't matter. But if you can see that, this is basically, these are all Hackney carriages. Obviously, there's still congestion in a horse-drawn world. None of them are going very fast. There's one of those trolley buses. And you can see where the design for the eventual London bus came from with the stairs at the back there. They moved at the back because the front was too dangerous, because if you fell off, you went under the horse's hooves. So that was 1905, and you can see just about to come into shot is the one and only car that occurs in this shot here. There it is. That's the only car. So that's the early part of that decade. Now here's a clip from slightly later. Just, yeah, if you click on to the next one. So now you can see here that a lot of those horse-drawn buses have been replaced by motors. But there's a car. There's a car. About to see another motorised bus here. So it's getting pretty chaotic. And by 1911, so in 1901, at the start of that decade, there were only 23,000 cars in the whole of Britain. And that's about one for every 1.5, 2,000 people. Meanwhile, there was about one horse for every about 9 people. So the car was still this very much niche thing. But this was the golden age of the bicycle, as Belinda touched upon earlier. Now, the reason for that was that up until the 1880s, the penny farthing was how you got around. It was this big bicycle, one wheel, dangerous. And basically, women actually couldn't get on it without the help of men. So it wasn't a very independent vehicle. But around the end of the 1880s, what was called the safety bicycle was invented. Huge development, not one big wheel, but 2 wheels. But the other big thing, it had a chain and it also had gears, but it also had pneumatic tyres. So it was a lot more comfortable for people to get around. Okay, next slide. So as we've heard, that basically this is the kind of dress that you were meant to wear in this day and age. This was what a good Edwardian lady wore. You weren't really allowed out of the house unless you had a corset, petticoats and a hat. And you probably changed those several times a day. But obviously the bicycle came along and, click on, that wasn't really practical. So at least women's dress started to change and became more like that, more akin to kind of where the trousers ended up. Next slide. And so the thing was that the bicycle helped ladies change fashion. And this was noted, but it wasn't just fashion, though. It was just their complete sense of independence and ability to get around. So it's worth noting at the turn of that century, women still had to be largely accompanied when they went out. This is a quote from Beatrice Grimshaw, who says, "I bought a bicycle. I rode unchaperoned, miles and miles beyond the limits possible to the soberly trotting horses. The world opened before me." And so that's what the bicycle did for women. It wasn't just about fashion. It was about independence. And unlike the horse, which you could ride in your dresses, side saddle, obviously the bicycle you couldn't. So it was more than just about fashion. Next slide. So perhaps men thought, though, that women would just sort of get on the bike and carry on wearing those outfits, and that would be enough, and following the same rules of being decorous and demure. Click on. And read manuals like this, Bicycling for Ladies, about how to do it correctly. Next slide. But no, if you had too much fun, if you this cartoon on the right is actually sort of poking fun at women that enjoyed their bicycle riding too much. And there was a name adopted for women like this, the female scorcher. And if you just click on, there's a quote from a newspaper in America that dubbed this term the scorcher. And I hope there's a lot of scorchers here tonight, by the way. And it was this. So, a woman with her back doubled into a bow knot, her hat awry, her hair dishevelled, her face scarlet with exertion, is neither fascinating nor attractive. She takes on a worried and anxious look in her eyes and has her muscles developed at the expense of her feminine grace and her complexion coarsened. So, yeah, that was what happened if you became a feminine scorcher. And I don't know if anyone here has heard of the mythical medical term bicycle face. So this was dreamt up by male doctors, unfortunately from Britain, just click on, in around this time. And bicycle face was meant to describe that affliction of basically your face as it contorted in, well, I guess pleasure, frankly. And all other sort of mythical problems with to do with child rearing and all of that nonsense. So next slide. And obviously we know that the bicycle was adopted by, the suffragettes as a tool of emancipation. And I guess I'm probably not going to be the only woman on International Women's Day to read this quote from Susan B. Anthony, who said, the bicycle has done more to emancipate women than any one thing in the world. I stand and rejoice every time I see a woman ride by on a wheel. And I certainly do. So it's against this backdrop, next slide, it's against this backdrop that the McCain sisters were born. And we were lucky, my family, that Mr. McCain was quite a forward-thinking guy. And in 1906, he had to go to Berlin to pick up some pianos, because that's where he bought them from. So, but rather than go there on the boat and the train, he decided that he would take his young family with him, and they would all go there by bicycle. So that's what they did. The whole family rode. They got the ferry to the Hook of Holland, as many of you here may have done now, and then they got on their bikes and they rode to Berlin. And at that time, John was about 60, but my granny was 10 and her younger sister was 9. So maybe that doesn't seem so unusual now, but back then I think this was really, really, really unusual. Next slide, please. So how do we know about this journey? Well, we know about this journey because of this. And this is the little black diary that the governess to my granny kept. And this diary was kept in our family, and it was kind of handed down like a little Bible, a really, really precious little thing. So thank you to Florence for keeping this diary. And I'm going to read you a few little excerpts just to give you a flavour of this trip. Hopefully we've got time for that, because it's a glimpse back into the past and also into transport history. Next slide. Unfortunately, there are no photographs to go with that diary, but this is one picture that we have, an actual picture of that on the left. That is May McCain, who was my great-grandmother, and that is her riding the bicycle. If you're at back, you probably can't see, but she looks really fine, I think. She's got a fantastic outdoor coat, smart white shirt. She has got a hat on, but she does look set for riding as well. So that was the only picture we've got. So I'm going to read you now some short excerpts just to give you a flavour of this journey. Before I do that, next slide. Just to share with you what the roads would have been like that they cycled on. So they would have been largely cycling through rural Holland and Germany, and these roads would have been mile upon mile of empty road. Beautiful. Their only travellers would have been animals and carts and farm labourers, and their only close passes from rain and punctures and poor road services. Most of the roads were unsealed, so they never had a problem. They never had a problem with cars, but they did have a problem with dust. So when they arrived at the hotel every night to stay, they didn't have time to wash their lycra, their quick-drying lycra. They had to get their tweed clothes brushed by the hotel porters, and indeed they'd never had showers or baths in the hotels. They did have a wash basin, but they had to wait till they got to the towns and use the municipal baths. So next slide. In the cities, it was a different story. So these are some pictures from cities of the day. Top left is Amsterdam, top right Berlin, bottom left is San Francisco, and bottom right is Deansgate, Manchester. And I want you to see these, because ultimately, I go back to my point about this being this 10-year window where all of transport was still to play for, and public transport was still the main form of getting around, even though the motor car was coming to the fore. Look at the roads. The roads are made for all forms of transport. They're made for trams, for buses, for people with handcarts, for horses. They are not made exclusively for the car. And we should remember that today when we look out the window at those roads. They were never made for cars alone. They were made for all of us. And let's remember that. Next slide. So this is a station, one of the places where they got the train, and you can see here that your longer journeys would have been taken by train, and when you arrived at the destination, you'd have caught a horse and carriage to take you on to wherever you were going. The right-hand picture is a picture of a cobbled street, and it was interesting that the family weren't really able to cycle through towns and cities, partly because of the trams and buses, but mainly because the cobbled streets outside the towns. It was all unsealed, lovely, smooth roads. Right, I better keep going. How long have I got? Next slide. Right, excerpts. Okay, so I'm going to start with the first excerpt from the diary, which I hope you'll enjoy. So this is a picture to go with this. This is Florence writing in her words. It was 8 p.m. when I went out of London Bridge Station, and I mounted my bike and rode on the bridge and nearly across it, before I remembered I had no light. I hopped off at once, intending to light my lamp, but I had no matches. I just thought it was a brilliant little insight at the start of the diary into a world where you had to light your own bicycle lamp. No batteries either. Okay, so the next slide. So this is kind of once they're over in the continent and they're cycling through those fields. And they attracted a lot of attention. Like I said, it was very, very unusual. So here's another quote. Everyone stares at us. Where we stopped to get a drink, we were mobbed. Children ran from all directions and crowded round us as though we were a Punch and Judy show. They followed us through all the streets until we finally left town. In one village, we passed a dancing bear, but we attracted more attention than it did. Beautiful little image there. Okay, next slide. But one of the things that really stands out from reading this diary is just how wonderful it is cycling in a world before the motor car had taken off. And I think this little excerpt sums that up. The roads are lovely. There is a river on one side and wooded hills on the other. There are lots of wooden enemies, and I picked two to wear. In one part, the road was lined on both sides with cherry blossom. The scent was lovely, and the road was carpeted with petals. Later, our way was through a pine forest where it was quite dusk. The sky was reddened by the setting sun, the air full of fragrance from the wet pines, with not a soul in sight, nor a sound to be heard, or any sign of any living thing beside ourselves. It was wonderful riding through complete stillness. Again, I just can't imagine riding through complete stillness now, how wonderful that must have been. Okay, we better keep going. Right, next slide. Another thing that was possible in this world, in this journey, was that while they stayed in hotels in the evening, they were able to stop and gain sustenance just from the side of the road. You know, that's what travellers used to do. So one day they just stopped at a farmhouse like this and went in, and this was the lunch that they received. A dozen boiled eggs, a plate of raw but thin ham, a pot of coffee with a jug of hot milk, a mass of rich yellow butter, and a plate of slices of brown bread. And all of that obviously would have been, made on the farm. Okay, right, next slide. I think we'll go to the next one. And the final excerpt I wanted to give you from the diary. Now, this isn't a picture of anyone in my family. This is actually a picture of a woman called Annie Kopczewski, can't pronounce that right, who was the first woman to cycle around the world in 1895. But I'm sharing it with you now because I just love her pose, and I kind of like to think of maybe Florence, who wrote the diary, as looking like this. And so the last excerpt is Florence describing her bicycle at the end of the diary and the end of her trip. Isn't my bicycle good to have come all this way without a puncture? Besides my worthy self, it had to carry my pilgrim basket full on the carrier over the back wheel, my Macintosh cape twisted around the frame under the saddle, my umbrella slung along the side of the front wheel, and lastly, my netted cord satchel, which hangs on my handlebars and holds my handkerchief, my purse, my little book, my pencil, this diary, my shoe covers, and any other small, useful on-the-way article. The way my Mac was attached was a triumph. I could get it on without stopping my ride. And I just love that image that Florence conjures up there, and what a woman she must have been. So, next slide. So they made it to Berlin. They made it 600 miles. They didn't cycle back. I think they all enjoyed it, except maybe for my great-grandmother May. She had at least 2 punctures every day, so I suspect she said no more. But that journey remains, I think, an amazing historical landmark. So what happened to the characters in the story? Because it hasn't quite finished yet. Okay, so Florence, who was the governess to my granny and her sister, well, she became the second wife of Josiah Wedgwood, of the sort of famous Wedgwood family. And she started life as a governess, but yes, ended as a kind of lady. But that is another story, and there's plenty to tell there. Okay, next slide. But what about my granny and her sister Kathleen? So when they returned from Berlin, they were sent to school in Scotland, and they had this really healthy start in life, and the school in Scotland focused on sport, and they were really talented young sportswomen, and that journey must have made them very fit. So click on. So they were soon playing badminton and tennis to quite a high level. That's them as young women. But the war came along, didn't it, in 1914, so they kind of stopped playing sport and joined the War Office for a few years. But when the war finished, Kathleen, my aunt, decided that she would try and pursue a sporting career. Next slide. So this is her after the war, developing as a young, very talented tennis player. And she was talented in many sports, including badminton, where she was the British champion. But it was at tennis that she excelled. And she travelled the country competing in many tournaments, staying with many friends to keep costs down. Because in those days, you had to stay amateur. Kind of earning money from sport was like a no-no. That was like cheating in these Corinthian kind of traditions that were nonsense. Anyway, so in 1924, she decided that she would enter the Wimbledon Tennis Championships, which are, quite famous tennis championships if you know about sport. And so in 1924, she became the Wimbledon singles ladies champion, and she did so again in 1926, by which time she was known as Kitty Godfrey when she was married to a fellow tennis player. Next slide. So this is a picture of Kathleen McCain, then known as Kitty Godfrey, presenting the trophy to Martina Navratilova in 1984, which was 100 years since the start of Wimbledon. And this is a picture of her with Virginia Wade, who was the woman to win Wimbledon after my great aunt. So that's what became of Kathleen, and important to say that she carried on playing tennis right until her 80s, and cycling. She used to cycle to the Wimbledon tennis courts to play tennis and cycle home again, and what a woman she was. So that was her. What about my granny? Well, my granny was also a talented sportswoman, but she didn't pursue it as hard, and she kind of was a mother to 3 children, including my father. And this is a picture of me. And, I forgot to say, she did get to the Wimbledon doubles ladies final with my great aunt. So she was no bad shakes. But this is a picture of me and my granny when I was born in 1967. And she was 72 when I was born. So and she died when I was about 15. So I never really knew her as a kind of as a young woman, and I wish I had. But we did know about this story, and the bicycling gene was definitely passed on. This is a picture of me and my twin sister developing bicycle face, I hope. And yes, that has continued. But football was my first love. And I developed, wanted to play football from a young age, and I did. I never became an elite sports person, but I did become a sports journalist, and I worked for BBC Sport for many a year, and I covered many sporting events, including Wimbledon, although sadly never when my great aunt was competing there. And just a last footnote on this is, that I this year went as a fan to watch England's women play the European Football Championships final at Wembley. And I just stood in awe of the sporting talent on show on that day, and also the women journalists behind the scenes, because both of those two sides of the sport have come on so much since the 80s when I was a kid trying to play football. So thank you. That's kind of the end of the story. There was a lot of bits to it. But I wanted to tell this story as a way to honour my female ancestors, and to give thanks and praise for the pioneering path that our mothers, our grandmothers, and our great-grandmothers trod, so that we can tread our paths. But also, I guess, a word for the men like John McCain, who perhaps were a bit forward-thinking and frankly just got out of the way of women being their independent selves. And he was a forward thinker, and others were too. So, and the last word of thanks goes to my mother. That's my mother there. And my mother was a woman who kept that diary and has helped research this story. And she is the person who's helped me tell this story today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire, and what an interesting family you have. And super sports people, and like you say, women's football and cycling has come so far, and rightly so. We've probably got time for just one or maybe two questions, if anyone has one for Claire. Anybody? Yes, this lady here.
Have you ever published details of that story anywhere outside the
No, but when Beth got in touch and said, would I speak tonight, I thought, maybe I'll pick this story so that it could be the start of something. My mum's researched Florence, the governess, who's got this incredible side story as well. So, yeah, I would like to do something.
Brilliant, thank you. Any last question? Anyone else? Anybody else? Oh, is there someone I've missed? No? So yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, Claire, and to our other brilliant speakers, Belinda, I think I've just popped to the loop, Samila and Hannah, and obviously Belinda, and when she comes back. So let's give them a last round of applause. So Belinda, they're just giving you a bit of a quick clap, but I think you missed it, and she's also clapping everyone else. Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah. Go on, Claire.
I just wanted to say one thing before I go, which is some of the projects that I'm working on now. If you are interested in getting involved in cycle campaigning, obviously there's Ladypedal, but there's also Walk Ride Greater Manchester, which is a whole other story about some of the things that I do. So if you're interested in getting involved in cycle campaigning, Walk Ride Greater Manchester, we just set up a new Discord, which is like an online kind of organising space. Either take a picture or just come and tap me on the shoulder and I give you the details. And I'm also involved in co-hosting a weekly active travel forum online for campaigners across England to communicate and to share stories on Zoom every Tuesday, and the details are up there. So thank you.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Claire. Also, don't forget to check out Be Pedal Ready, which is Belinda. I'm not sure. Oh, she's at the back. Yes, there she is. Also, check that out if you want to know about bike maintenance. We'll put all the links on our socials. If you want to find out a bit more about what Ladypedal does, about our bursary, our cycle progression fund, we also have an online shop, merchandise, which is Red Bauble. Our hashtag is @lady_pedal, and check us out. I also want to do a few more shout outs. Thank you to Station South for letting us use this brilliant venue. And the bar will stay open for a bit longer, I think. Also, thank you to our funders, Manchester City Council, for the International Women's Day funding to support us in covering our event space. I also want to thank all the Ladypedal volunteers, because as I say, we all do it for free. So we've got Beth, who's been doing all the projections. We've got Hannah doing the sound. We've had some extra volunteers tonight, Fee, Heidi and Laura, that have helped us with filming, and all the rest of the girls, Annabelle on the door, and some others, Lois, Rosie, too many Vinja, but yeah, there's loads of us. So thank you to all the Ladypedal girls for organising this wonderful event. Hopefully we'll have another one maybe in sort of autumn time. And also one last thing, we had a shout out from a lady called Layla. There's an event called Kidical Mass on the 14th of May, which is a ride for children. And they're looking for volunteers, for marshals, and also just people to join that bike ride. Did you want to say something quickly, Layla? Or is that everything? Go on. Yeah, come up.
So my name's Layla, and I live in Chorlton, and I've kind of started cycling since I had my 2 children, and my kind of good journey into cycling has been just that, and realised fairly recently that Critical Mass UK exists, so kind of a family version of Critical Mass, and there's a Critical Mass that happens in most other cities, but we don't have one in Manchester. So me and some other parents in South Manchester formed Critical Mass Manchester, and the first ride out, the first Critical Mass on the roads, which is kind of the whole notion of Critical Mass, will happen starting at Central Library on Sunday, May the 14th. I think we've had lots of interest from families from across the city to join, but we do need marshals, so adults who don't have children with them, to help support and marshal the event. So if anybody can help, we are on Facebook and on Twitter, but you can come and have a chat.
Yes, we'll share the details, yes. So if you want to find out about Layla's event and any of the other speakers' events, obviously check us out, Ladypedal at lady_pedal. And we'll put all the details. We'll put Samira's amazing poem on there. We'll put all the links to everyone's amazing bicycle work. So yeah, we just want to say thank you so much to our speakers once again. They were all amazing. And thank you to all of you guys for coming out tonight. And enjoy International Women's Day tomorrow.